But even if we're going by the skeptical dates, we're still getting these biographies of Jesus being written much more early than some of the most important figures in the ancient world, like Alexander the Great, where we're waiting hundreds of years. Where with Jesus, we're really only waiting a couple of decades.
And why do you think, Wesley, it could be a lot earlier than the assumed scholarly consensus?
Yeah, well, I think if we go by the assumption that Mark is written first, which I think is approximately reasonable to assume based on a number of different factors, and then then Matthew and Luke come afterwards. Well, Luke's prologue certainly indicates that he's, as I said before, he's writing up an orderly account on the basis that previous accounts are either not as well researched or simply floppy in their writing. And I think if you look at Mark's syntax and grammar and the flow certainly qualifies a bit of an unorderly account. So I think that Luke probably has Mark in mind when he makes that comment. And I do think that the evidence bears out a literary relationship between Matthew and Luke based on their parallel usage in sections that certainly extract wording that is very, very similar, if not identical, and most likely indicates Luke coming after Matthew. However, Luke was a traveling companion of Paul, and Luke writes the Gospel of Luke and then Acts. They're kind of a part one, part two. What we know based on external biblical evidence, so sources outside of the Bible itself, that Paul dies in 64 AD, and then Peter between 64 and 68 AD. And I think actually that that Luke's book of Acts is making an argument with a relationship between the connection of the apostolic brothers of Peter and Paul. According to Richard Balcombe, who's a historian in the UK, he actually ascribes that Acts is written at least before 64 AD. And Acts follows Luke's gospel, and Matthew predates Luke, and Luke precedes Mark. And so therefore, it isn't ridiculous to put Matthew, I think, because Luke doesn't include Peter and Paul's death. And we know that both Peter and Paul die somewhere between 64 and 68 in the same city in Rome and are martyred. And yet the book of the book of Acts doesn't include their death, even though the argument kind of flow throughout it is to connect these individuals. So I think we can say at minimum, Acts is written before the death of Peter and Paul. So therefore, I think at the very least, given the lack of Peter and Paul's death, it's a good marker to put the synoptics pre-70.